Nothing's more important to watch for Oregon's defense than the secondary.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time. Once again, for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Lots coming on today's show. Plenty of defensive talk. If you like defense, this is going to be the show for you. Talk about the defensive line. Can they be as good as they were last year? They could be closer than you might think. And some of the best things that many of you are excited to watch this Saturday at the spring game. That's all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So, what's the most important set of things to watch for Oregon's defense this Saturday? I'm starting with the secondary here. Now, this is a position group that was good last year. It's hard to wrap your head around that sometimes. I struggle with it too, believe me. When you look at the numbers and how the defense played for most of last season, the secondary was quite good. And then in the last two games, they just weren't. So Oregon has lost their top six guys from last year's secondary. And I don't know what the depth chart's going to look like. I mean, I'll take a stab at it at some point this week. It's really, really hard. Outside of Dylan Thieneman, the Purdue transfer, I don't know. There are so many names. It's really, really interesting. But if you're talking most, and that is what I'm talking about, of course, the most important things to watch for this Oregon defense, I'm looking to see who stands out in the secondary. Where do you have playmakers? Who's a shutdown corner? Jabbar Muhammad last year was really good. Christian Gonzalez has been, one of the best corners Oregon's had in the last 5, 10, frankly, in the last 15, 20 years. Gonzo is really, really good. I'm pretty sure he's the only Oregon defensive back to get drafted in the top 10, at least in my lifetime of following Oregon football. That guy was really, really good. You've always had, since Dan Lanning's been here, for the most part, a shutdown guy. Who is that guy? Don't know. And I'm talking cornerbacks here, not the safeties as well, which is a whole different conversation. So where are the playmakers? Who looks like they're going to emerge as a starter? Who's starting with Dylan Thieneman at safety? What does the nickel position look like? We don't really know because Dan Lanning is really good at saying a bunch of words without saying really anything. And the spring game is going to be our first peek behind the curtain to get a feel for what this Oregon team is going to look like. So the secondary issues that came about at the end of last season stemmed from communication that was due to struggling with tempo and motion. So I don't know if that's something you'll see a ton of. The offensive playbooks tend to be very vanilla in a spring game, but still, because I don't know what that room's going to look like, and it's, the biggest question mark for Oregon defensively, that's the most important thing to look for, is that you've got guys out there who are matching up with Oregon's top receivers who we know are good and are winning one-on-one reps, getting past deflections, creating play, just being disruptive in some capacity and not having communication breakdowns. So that's the most important thing to look for this Saturday in the spring game defensively. Second thing, come down a level and go to the linebacker room, because I know who the top two guys at linebacker are going to be. You're going to have Bryce Betcher. You're going to have Devin Jackson. I don't think there is any debate. I don't think the coaches are hiding the ball in this. I don't think there's a secret surprise or anything like that. Those will be your first two linebackers, whereas last year it was Bossa and Bryce Betcher, and Devin Jackson was the third. Justin Jacobs occasionally played as the fourth. Those are the two spots, though, the number 3 and 4 positions at linebacker, that I don't know. And remember, if you're thinking to yourself, well, it's just a third-string linebacker, first of all, think about how impactful Devin Jackson was to the defense last year. Played a lot. He was the number 3 linebacker. Someone's got to fill that role now. And think about it this way. You're one injury away from that guy becoming a starter with your first 11 on the field. So that is an unknown. There are a variety of options. There are technically 5 options. Really, I think at linebacker, there are 4. You've got a trio of redshirt freshmen in Kamar Mathuti, Braden Platt, and Dylan Williams, who are in that 2024 class. You've got Jerry Mixon, who is in the 23 class, has an extra year of experience, wasn't quite as highly rated of a recruit, but from what we've seen in limited action, I think he's looked pretty darn solid. And then you have Gavin Nix, 2025 true freshman. Maybe he flies up the depth chart. I don't know. Really interesting film, but I never expect guys to just be ready to play as a true freshman. We don't see it at linebacker a ton. Justin Flo, when he was healthy, and Noah Sewell are exceptions, not the rule there. So that's the second most important thing, is figuring out how that unit looks after the top 2. What sort of depth do you have? And I said last week on the show that if Oregon was going to add a transfer, that'd be the position group where it would make the most sense, just because you don't have the experience there. A former Duck, Harrison Taggart, entered the transfer portal from BYU, and I thought to myself, it's not the least likely thing that could happen. It would make some sense. I don't think he comes in and boots Jackson or Betcher out of a starting spot, but he fills that number 3 spot, and the young guys then would, be battling for the 4th spot or trying to pass or, whatever, or what have you. But, Ryan Michalowski also said recently, like, what does it say about me as a coach if, I'm not developing these guys, if I need to bring in a transfer all the time? And I get and respect that, and also am excited about what those guys bring to the table, because we saw them in the spring game a bit last year. I don't think they wowed anybody. But when you get when you get a full year under your belt, and you've had 2 off seasons to undergo, it can make a big difference. So I'm excited to see what those guys can bring to the table. Tosh Lupoi, of course, had glowing things to say, which of course he's going to have nice things to say about players that he recruited or helped recruit. Anyway, so the linebacker depth showing up is another really important factor for this Oregon defense. And then I'll get more to the defensive line in the second segment on today's show. How disruptive is that interior of the defensive line? I think these are the 3 biggest questions for Oregon's defense going into 2025, because you just lost a couple of just dudes, absolute positive dudes on the interior. But you might have a couple of dudes in there. And I think in the spring game, you can get a better sense for how the defensive line is going to be than you can the offensive line. Last year in the spring game, the D-line really dominated the offensive lines. That's because you tend to have more depth on the defensive line, or depth isn't the right word, because there's plenty of depth along the offensive line as well that goes 7 or 8 deep. But, defensive line probably does go deeper in that with, quality numbers and guys who could play. But the cohesion, I think, is not as important on the defensive line as the offensive line. And so when you have a mix of 1s and 2s on an offensive line unit in spring game, it can be hard for him to go up against, a defensive front that very closely resembles what's going to be on the field of Saturdays in the fall. Think about it like this. A defensive line unit in a spring game is going to be closer to a starting caliber group than an offensive line, just from what I've seen from the Ducks in the last couple of years. But I definitely want to see the interior guys be disruptive, and there are a lot of young guys that are interesting to watch there. Aiden Breland, Terrence Green, Tioni Gray, like the list goes on. So I'll talk about them more in the second segment. But if you think there's something else important that I overlooked for Oregon's defense this Saturday that you want to see show up, you drop it in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good jazz. This defensive line was, as I hyped them up to be a year ago. I said they'd be the best since 2014. I absolutely believe they were. This year's team can be just about as good. First, this episode brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, which is neat, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. And look, I've used Game Time to go see a comedy show. I've used Game Time to go to a football game, the Big Ten Championship, as a matter of fact, and the process was great. I found a great deal. I knew what to expect. Tickets to my phone, no problems. Bingo, bango, bongo, you're done. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I found my cups. My everydayers know what I'm talking about there. I am talking about literal cups like that you drink out of. Yeah, I found them. There is still so much unpacking to do. Moving's a pain. Moving's a pain. But then once it all gets settled, I know it'll be worth it. So I'm gonna hype up this defensive line room again. It worked for me last year. I had that take from the time the summer months rolled around, really post-spring. I thought, once Derrick Harmon got in there and we saw what he was capable of, I tell you what, I said this could be the best defensive line since 2014. I think they were. I think last year's unit was deeper without the level of high-end talents. 2014, you had DeForest Buckner, you had Eric Armstead. Those guys are both top 10 picks. Derrick Harmon will be a first-round pick. He will not be a top 10 pick in all likelihood based on the mock drafts that I have seen. And if you ever have questions about Oregon players going in the NFL, I'm 100% here for that here on the show because I love watching #ProDucks go and thrive. By the way, oh, man. The NFL has already caught wind that Bo Nix and Tez Johnson are brothers. And a 2-minute, 45-second story video was tweeted out yesterday, was brought to my attention by one of you out there. Oh, they're going to love it. They're going to love that storyline. And it is a great story. Any story gets old when you hear it as many times as we have. But alas, here we are. Okay, bringing this back to the defensive line, which I think is going to be great again. Can they be as good as last year? I think they can get closer to it than you might think. Because when you just say out loud, no Jordan Burch, no Derrick Harmon, and no Jamari Caldwell, you're talking about a lot of not just production lost, but a lot of high-end talent. My argument that if last year's defensive line was an A, that this year's could be an A- and get right up to where they were is based on the key returners more than anything else. So all the guys that are in the room go like this, that, have a chance to play. Matthew Johnson, Bear Alexander, Aiden Breland, Tioni Gray, Amari Washington. I'm chair of the Amari Washington fan club. Don't forget it. Jericho Johnson, Zadavian Sims, Terrence Green. Those are the interior guys. And then players who are listed on the roster as outside linebackers, but, are just edge pieces in the 4-2-5 scheme that Oregon runs. You've got Mateo Uiagalelei, Blake Purchase, Ashton Porter, Nasir Wyatt, Tatum Tuioti, and Elijah Rushing. So the depth of blue chip recruiting talent in there is really, really deep. Like the hallmark of the first really two, but especially the 2023 class for at Dan Lanning in those cycles and Tosh Lupoi was defensive line. Well, in a good way, those chickens are coming home to roost because now you're going to have several of those guys step into big-time roles if they weren't already. So the players that I expect to start, first four along the defensive line, I think you're going to have Tatum Tuioti take Jordan Burch's spot. I think you're going to have Bear Alexander and Amari Washington. Alexander's the USC transfer, of course, one-time Georgia Bulldog. Amari Washington going into his third season. And then Mateo starting for a second straight year off a season in which he led the Big Ten in sacks. So he had 10.5. And I think he goes crazy again this year. On paper right now, is that unit as good as Mateo Uiagalelei, Jamari Caldwell, Derrick Harmon, and Jordan Burch? Answer, no, they are not. However, the reason I say they can get close to it, really, really close, maybe not at the level of last year's unit up front, but they can get close to it because I expect Mateo to take another step forward. I expect Tatum Tuioti to be able to take a step forward starting in place of the now departed Jordan Burch. So I think Tuioti, he was not as big of a recruit as Burch. He doesn't have the same sorts of physical traits and upside, but dude has been more than solid over the last couple of years, and I think he can have the best season of his career. And really, the foundation of my take is rooted in Mateo going crazy, and I think he can. I think he can push for the Oregon single-season sacks record. He had 10.5 last year as a true sophomore, and going into his third year, if he stays healthy start to finish, and he makes more plays, I think than he maybe gets credit for in the discussion space in the run game, I think he can push for 14, 15 sacks. He is that sort of guy. I hope so much that he's still on the roster in 2026. I don't know how he will be, barring an injury this year, Mariota style, where he'd want to come back and prove to the NFL draft and scouting community what he's capable of at full strength. So I think if you take Mateo, who's of course on last year's defensive line, and you make him a better version of himself, that's an upgrade at one spot. Now, I do think you've downgraded with your 2 D tackles because last year's were just so good, but I think Amari Washington's about to pop. The growth he had from his first to second year was substantial. And I mean, I go back, the play that always stands out in my head was against Illinois. The Illini still had their starters in, the game was over, and he blew up the entire play, which is what you're looking for from a defensive line. Can you be one guy that everyone's got to know, game plan around, or just have an idea of where he's at all times? Amari Washington can be that dude. Speed, power, quickness, got a lot of traits. He can get after the passer. I think he has some work to do, at least according to PFF, in the run game defense department, but I'm incredibly bullish on what he brings to the table. And can he be Derrick Harmon? Maybe not this year. Next year, though, yeah, he could be a Derrick Harmon guy. I think this year he can be as good as Jamari Caldwell was a year ago. And then you go to Bear Alexander and say, okay, do I expect him to be Derrick Harmon? No. It's a Big Ten transfer that comes in after spending multiple years at a previous institution. He's not go somewhere, transfer for 1 year. Like, he's been around college football for a little while. I've heard good things about him. I don't know that it's fair to compare him directly to Derrick Harmon. I think that's his ceiling. I think that's absolutely what his ceiling is. We'll see how close he's able to get to that this year. But super, super stoked about what this defensive line could be. And then the depth behind him is just so good. I mean, you've got former 5-star, until he got, lost star, whatever, but former highly rated recruit Aiden Breland. You've got Tioni Gray. You've got Zadavian Sims. You got Terrence Green, who might be the biggest guy on this entire team. Certainly he's one of them up there. And then the backup edge guys, Elijah Rushing's a former 5-star. Ashton Porter going into his third year. Blake Perch is coming back after redshirting last season when he had a great true freshman year in 2023. Like, it's just deep. So I don't worry about the depth. I wonder what the first 4 will look like somewhat, but overall, I'm just bullish on this unit. I think this is going to be one of the best defensive lines in the Big Ten again. So I love the way they've recruited this position the last couple of cycles. At times it's felt like, man, there were so many players and they're not all, seeing the field. I mean, Tuioti and Mateo, of course, were, but a couple of non-freshmen that are kind of rising into potential roles this year to keep an eye on. Definitely watching Aiden Breland. Definitely the fact that he was in the Rose Bowl, Marion Winston and Jaden Moore had transferred out, so there were a couple of roles, or there were snaps available along that defensive line. I think it's notable that Breland got in there. Reminds me of Amari Washington from the year prior, and Terrence Green, like I mentioned, just third-year Duck who is just huge. He's not Jordan Scott looking huge, but he's just a big get off the bus sort of guy. So those are a couple guys that are on the rise. I think see a bigger role this year, and we'll definitely be watching on Saturday in the spring game. My favorite true freshman, maybe from a film standpoint in this entire 2025 class, Nasir Wyatt. Nasir Wyatt coming off the edge is as twitchy and bendy as anybody I've seen. He's not Kayvon Thibodeau level traits. The speed, though, he has, he is speed rusher personified. I think he's a better version of Jaden Moore, who had a role on Oregon's team last year. I don't know if he, cracks the rotation this season with Elijah Rushing in the fold. In years to come, though, I'm keeping my eye on Nasir White. He has some of my favorite film of any defensive lineman or outside linebacker in the last couple of years. So this is the highest grade that I have given out yet to a position group going into the spring game, and it's the highest grade I will give out. This is the only A. This is an A- for me for the defensive line. I love this unit, what they can bring to the table. Stoked to see how they play on Saturday. And going up against, mixing and matching of offensive lines, I think they could have a big day. Saturday's going to be fun. Going to be really, really fun. You all sent me, well, not you all, some of you sent me what you're excited about. And there's one connection we're all waiting for. First, this episode brought to you by Prize Picks. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first-inning runs, Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. It's fast and simple. Setting up a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure. Plus, they have exclusive promos. You can take advantage of Taco Tuesday, where Prize Picks offers discounts on select player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Go check them out. Prize Picks, run your game. So keep sending me what you're excited to watch on Saturday, and I'm happy to discuss, of course, here on the show because I love hearing from you guys. But I just kind of asked, what do you want to see? What excites you about the spring game being on Saturday? And a couple of things that I came across in the good old YouTube comments, which are just a wonderful time down there. First one I saw is the first one that was on my mind. I think it's going to be on a lot of people's minds. It's the Dante Moore to Dakorien Moore connection. We are all going to want more of Moore to Moore. Okay? I did it once. I can't promise I'll never do it again. I won't do it for at least a little while. But you've got the number one receiver in the class, a former top quarterback in the class of 2023. These guys are kind of the pinnacle for people mentally, I think, as to why you still care about recruiting and go after big-time recruits. Is so you can bring in these sorts of guys. And they have the potential to become one of the most prolific quarterback-receiver tandems in recent memory. I think of Bo Nix with Tez Johnson. Did you know they're related? Bo Nix and Troy Franklin was a really good combo. And Tez Johnson and Dylan Gabriel found some chemistry pretty quickly. Justin Herbert and Dylan Mitchell were really good back in 2018, which is the last time Oregon had a 1,000-yard receiver until Franklin and Tez did it in the same year in 2023. Or Masoli and Jeff Mail, an incredibly reliable tandem. There are a lot of different ones. Drop some of those below. Your favorite quarterback receiver tandems over the years. This could become a great one, especially if Dante, and I hope he will, comes back for 2026. If he starts in 25, comes back in 26, and those two guys are there and they've already got a season together under their belt, I mean, that could be some special stuff. So, yeah, I'm fully in the camp of Dakorien Moore. I'll have a segment about it, probably on tomorrow's show. Kind of depends on, how the news goes and whatnot. But I think that this connection can be so good. Dante is a special thrower of the football. Has to figure out the turnover issues, of course, that he had at UCLA. If he does, though, he can make special throws. Dakorien can make special plays. So, yeah, I'm fully on board with Dakorien. The first time they connect, even if it's on a screen pass, I think it's going to be like a pivotal moment in people's minds that they just remember, that was the first one, and eventually it'll translate to Saturdays, of course. Another name I saw suggested Kingston Lopa. So I saw a quote flying around about him recently in a post-practice interview. I forget exactly who gave it, but Lopa had kind of an unexpectedly important role in the Big Ten championship game where Oregon couldn't cover Tyler Warren in the first half. Tight end is about to get drafted probably in the first round out of Penn State. And Oregon said, you know what? We're going to double this guy a lot, but when we know they're going to pass, Kingston Lopa is going to go out and guard him. And he hadn't played meaningful snaps all year. But when you're 6'3", 6'4", yeah, you're going to go out there and at least provide a different sort of matchup. So he reminds me a lot of Brian Addison with his height. And, Addison didn't end up lasting at Oregon, went to UCLA, and I think was still a pretty good player over there. I always liked what he brought on the back end of the defense. He was fast, explosive, had some length. He could hit guys. And, Lopa, we only saw the coverage skills against Tyler Warren. I thought they were pretty darn good for, it being your first meaningful action and you're going up against a first-round caliber NFL tight end. Thought he did a good job. There's a lot more to playing safety than just being able to cover in obvious passing situations. So, maybe he has that role again this year where he's a pass coverage specialist, or maybe he's one of the starting safeties. We'll just have to find out. Then, this was my favorite one. I should have jotted down who left this comment, but I asked, well, what are you most excited to see? Someone said, the whole team. You know what? I get where you're coming from there too, because we don't know what the identity of this team is. How different's the offense with Dante Moore? How different's the defense without, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 key contributors from a year ago? It's a lot of guys. There are a lot of questions. There are a lot, and overall, I think at this point, we're all just ready to watch some football, even if it's in a simulated setting. Shout out to Dan Lanning for keeping the spring game going. I think it's going to be great. Get to Austin on Saturday. Make sure you make it the best environment you can. Recruits will be in attendance. Show them what Austin and Oregon is all about. But yeah, I think there is just an overall mysterious element of the players, but also how the players come together. How does the offense look with Dante Moore versus Austin Novosad at the helm? How does the defense look with Dylan Thieneman or Bryce Betcher both calling the signals back there? Yeah, there are a lot of things that are going to be different from a year ago, and I'm excited to watch it all. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.